here. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for attending. I know this to me, the craziest time of the year is right now. I know most of you, but in case you don't know me, I'm Ginny Ratsoy. I'm Associate Professor of English and Provost Fellow of Teaching and Learning Support here in the Center for Student Engagement and Learning Innovation. I know we're working on changing that. Yeah. I know every time my brain goes, am I going to be able to do it this time? So thanks for signing the attendance sheet, and I think you all have a little survey to fill in. It's not an assessment, I hasten to add. It's a survey on what other kinds of presentations you'd like. Gary Hunt, the coordinator of the CSELI, and I started this series to celebrate the scholarship of teaching and learning at TRU. You may know about the Sodal inventory that Penny Haggerty, collections librarian, Brenda Marini, who's a former research assistant and now a grad student at UVic, and I put together. If you don't, just Google my name on the library webpage and you'll find it. What it is a list of an annotated bibliography of publications about teaching by TRU faculty. And so Gary and I put out a call to people who are in that inventory to present in this series, and Mark was kind enough to offer his services. We're using this inventory in a number of ways. One thing we hope to do is to establish a list of experts. Oh, let's just say Mark could be on that list. Mentors who'd be willing to work individually or in small groups with novices to Sodal. And we're using the inventory to share Sodal discussions across campus and expand Sodal. By the way, if you do have Sodal publications and they're not in that inventory, please email Gary and or me, maybe both, with that information. So there's the context, and here's getting to the point. Mark's title is The Trouble with Assessment Is. Mark gave us the background. He, during his his sabbatical, presented on assessment and attended Eric Mazur's lecture at Harvard entitled Assessment, the Silent Killer of Learning. And so I could see by the response that this is a topic that has hit home to many of us. And by the way, if you have colleagues who wish to be here and aren't, our wonderful Leon Rassico, as you can see, is taping this session, and it will be available, within a week or so, Leon?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, without further ado, let's welcome Mark.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for having me. I have to admit, on sabbatical, when I first contacted Jenny, it was in October or November, and I thought, January 15th, no problem. That's ages away. I got to be no problem. And then somehow I thought it was the 14th. And then I was scheduled a meeting for today, and fortunately the person on the meeting, who was coordinating the meeting, said, Mark, you're presenting today. So fortunately that all came together very smoothly. Just so you know, so I want to make a bit of an apology for the sparse abstract that I provided. Again, I'm going to blame that on my sabbatical hangover and my jet lag, in which state I produced it. So especially for those of you that are not here, I guess I should look at the camera, my apologies for the abstruse abstract. Maybe you'll enjoy this video. As a bit of a correction, I unfortunately did not attend Eric Mazur's lecture in Harvard. Would have been lovely, but I did see it on YouTube. So most of what I will be presenting is really his arguments for assessment, or the problems with assessment. Now, is this a touch screen? Does anyone know? Doesn't look like it. All right, I'll do it this way, maybe. No, maybe I won't. I'll do it this way. Okay, so I'm going to start off my talk with, of course, in my abstract, I didn't actually tell people who Eric Mazur was. That was certainly an oversight. So I'll quick introduction of him. We're going to talk about, again, he presented a lecture at Harvard called Assessment, the Silent Killer of Learning. He's since represented it with a slightly different title. If you search YouTube for Eric Mazur assessment, this video will come up. And it's a really well spent 1 hour. I'll try and give you a bit of an overview of what the lecture is. First starts by talking about the purpose of assessment. And we're going to talk about that as well. Talk about problems with assessment, and then briefly talk about solutions. And then hopefully I won't go the full distance here and we can have a group discussion. Eric Mazur. So you can see immediately why I might have not introduced him, because of course he's a physicist. So I just assumed that everyone knew who he was because I'm a physicist. At any rate, he's the Dean of Applied Physics at Harvard. He's been very active in educational studies. In 1990, he developed peer instruction, wrote a book on it, and lately, as we can tell by the title of this lecture, he's turned his sights to assessment. I'll let you see the video yourself, but I'll try and explain a couple of reasons why he is turning his eye to assessment and asking questions about it. First, I'd like to start off with a bit of a video here. This is really a video from the late 70s, early 80s. And it was an interesting time for universities. Surveys of student attitudes in the 70s or before the 70s, asking the question, why do you go to university? The majority of the answers were to improve oneself, for a better life, to learn about life, these sorts of answers. After the 70s, it's more tended to be to get a job, right? So kind of a key turning point was at this time. And of course, that correlated to increased enrollments. I wonder if this will run with the connection here. We'll see. And of course, with increased enrollments, that meant more students. How do you get all those students through a particular course? And that leads us to our, if you like, our current state of assessment. It will go. It will absolutely go. I know it will. Wow. Okay, so some of you may know this.
I'm sure we all know.
I find education, I think it don't matter where you go to school. Italy, America, Brazil, it's all the same. It's all just memorization. And it don't matter how long you can remember anything, just so you can parrot it back for the test. And I got this idea for a school I would like to start. Something called the 5-minute university. And the idea is that in 5 minutes, you learn what the average college graduate remembers 5 years after he or she's out of school. With the cost of like $20. That might seem like a lot of money, $20 just for 5 minutes. But that's for like a tuition, captain and gown rental, graduation picture, snacks, everything included. You know, like in college, you have to take foreign language. Well, at the 5-minute university, you can have your choice. Any language you want, you can take it. Say if you want to take Spanish, what I teach you is, ¿Cómo está usted? That means, how are you? And the answer is, muy bien, means very well. And believe me, if you took 2 years of college Spanish, 5 years after you're out of school, ¿Cómo está usted? Muy bien, about all you're going to remember. So in my school, that's all you learn. You see, you don't have to waste your time with the conjugations, vocabulary, all that junk. You just forget it anyway. Now, what's the difference? Economics, supply and demand. That's it. Business is you buy something and you sell it for more. Theology, I'm going to have a theology department, you know, since I'm a priest, it's all right. And what you have to learn in theology is the answer to the question, where is God? And the answer is, God is everywhere. Why? Because he likes you. That's kind of a combination of the Disney and Roman Catholic philosophy. It's just as perfect for the late 70s or early 80s, you know? Just as perfect. Well, after the courses are all over, then it's a time for a little Easter vacation. No time to go to Fort Lauderdale, only lasts like 20 seconds. But what I do for you, I like to turn on the sun lamp, you know, I give you a little glass of orange juice. That's the snack part, orange juice. And then after vacation, you know, after you swallow it real quick, then it's a time for the final exams. I say to you, ¿Cómo está usted? You say, muy bien. Where is God? The God is everywhere. Economics is supply and demand. Then I put on your cap and a gown. I get out to my Polaroid camera. You know, make a little snap and flash a picture for you. I give you the picture. You give me $20. I give you a diploma. And you're a college graduate, ready to go. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure, right next door to the 5-minute university, I might have opened up a little law school. You know, you got another minute?
I just had to play that to the end. Okay, so other sort of problems with university enrollment and this sort of thing. Who needs college? And of course there is this classic argument that there are people who are, let's say, superstars that did not finish college. So I'm going to a couple of pictures. Anyone know who this is? James Cameron, our very own James Cameron. All right, deep sea explorer, bringer on of Avatar, etc. And the Titanic, right? I still have not seen that. Okay, how about this one? He looks like me. Facebook guy, that's right. Yin and Yang. All right. Of course, I had to find a woman. I thought, well, we should include a woman. So you might not know this. This is the youngest female billionaire in the world. She's 30, and her name is Elizabeth Holmes. She dropped out of second-year chemical engineering, I think, to basically start the whole industry of lab on a chip. And really, as far as I can tell, is because she didn't like to give blood. She was totally afraid of it, and she wanted, you know, why give vials of blood when you can take a pinprick and really get the same information? So, of course, you know, so these people are all superstars on some level, but I have to say that I have a little bit of trouble with this definition of success. My wife's an OT, and really, life can be very simple and successful, but they all have, of course, meaningful occupation. So to me, people that have meaningful occupation are on their own level successful. So the other thing I would point out is that, yes, these people are, if you like, superstars. However, this is to try and correlate that with saying, oh, but they didn't have college, so you don't need college to become a superstar, is sort of like choosing all of the outlier data to present your argument. And if we all did that, we'd probably all have Nobel Prizes. But of course, we know that the power of statistics. So, especially Nancy. Okay, and the final thing is that these people all run corporations of some kind, and who, of course, make up those corporations? People that have attended university. So, we'll move on. I pulled this one off here as well, and we'll just get a little interaction going. So this is I'm going to say a student wearing this, and the t-shirt says, there are no final exams in real life. So just a quick poll. Who thinks this is a true statement? Put up your hand. No final exams in real life? Okay. Either you're all not interacting, or you all think that this is true. Not true, that there are, in fact, really. I asked if you agreed with this statement. Is that what I asked? and no one agreed with the statement. So you all think there are final exams in real life. And yes, I would argue that as well, but I would say that the final exams in real life are not the same as the final exams we give our students. In fact, they're quite different. And this is at the heart of the argument that Professor Mazur makes. So, second part of interaction here, and you really do have to interact here. Briefly discuss with your neighbors how many different purposes of assessment can you think of. So it's great, you're already at tables. If you want, you can elect a secretary or something. Jot down different purposes of assessment. I'll give you a few minutes on that.
So Mark, assessment
Yeah.
of students, assessment
Come up with.
See how well you adapt to professors teaching.
Okay, good.
So motivation for students, learning. Placements. So to assess a student in terms of where you want to place them. Admission for other programs, skill development.
Yeah.
Along those lines.
Okay. What have you guys got here? Anything to add to that list? Or?
Well, we find out what they've learned or haven't learned, as you've said, basis for providing feedback, and feedback on the professor's own instructional skill set we can take from that. And we said consolidate or synthesize knowledge. The student has that opportunity in the exam setting, that to become informed about what she or he knows or doesn't know. So.
All right, and you guys?
No, we're talking, for me, there are a number of purposes, but the primary purpose is to measure student performance and to distinguish them.
Okay.
That's my
Sort of a ranking then?
The ranking, but
Yeah.
primarily.
Sure.
But then there are others that come with it.
Absolutely. Okay, so we already see that when we talk about assessment, we can be talking about many different things. All right. Two words that are, sort of buzzwords are formative and summative assessments. All right. Formative are, of course, to monitor progress, and students can sort of see how they're doing relative to other students. Summative, of course, is to evaluate their students. Have they learned in some sense? Have we taught them in another sense? So there are sort of conflicting ideas of what assessment is supposed to be doing. Okay, so let's look at the problems with problems. So I teach physics. One of our main goals is to teach students problem solving. We'd like students to come out of university, yes, with some knowledge of physics, but also strong problem solving skills. Well, let's look at what might constitute a real problem. So Eric Mazur states that a real or authentic problem, all right, is a situation where you have a known solution, all right? What you don't know is how to get to that solution. All right, so some examples. As I was leaving Edinburgh to fly back to Canada, I had to go pay for some extra baggage. There were people in front of me that had flown in that morning from Ireland. Their plane from Ireland was late, so they missed their connecting flight to LA, and so they really needed to get to LA. They knew what the solution was, but how to get there was going to be another issue. Okay? Investment bankers, they know the solution. They know what their goal is. They want to make more money. All right? So the question is, how do you do that? All right? You need to solve that problem. Our students hopefully want to become healthy, happy, contributing adults. Right? That's the goal that they have. What path do they take? So these would be what Eric Mazur calls authentic problems. Right? What tends to show up on exams, or if you look at textbook problems, what the typical way that these problems work is that the students are applying a known procedure to find unknown solutions. Okay? Now, what I'm going to show in the next little example, and again, this is straight from the Eric Mazur's lecture, and I mostly kept it because it's really quite accessible to a wide range of people. I couldn't think of a other example that was quite as applicable, so accessible to everyone. So what I'm going to show is the slippery slope between this and this. Authentic, which we'd like to put on our exams, versus this, which typically ends up on our exams. Well, let's look a little bit at what we would like to, what do we test versus what we should test. So this is Bloom's taxonomy, which is just a hierarchy of if you like, levels of thinking or cognitive skills. At the base here, we have knowledge, which is just recollection. We have comprehension, and we have application of some of that knowledge. We have some analysis, which is identifying and analyzing patterns. Synthesis, which you can think of as creating. Once you have known what's gone before you, what can you do to create? And then evaluation, looking critically at what you've created. Does it work? Maybe deciding to go back and repeat the whole cycle. Okay? So ideally what we would like to test, the argument is that being a institution of higher learning, ideally our exam should cover all of this. Okay. What tends to happen though is that we tend to just look at this part. Right? And there's a fairly understandable reason why this happens. So when we look at our example, we're going to look at, again, the question that we want on the exam, what it tests, versus the question we can put on the exam within reason, if you like, of our students. Oh, let me do this. So here's the scenario. You drive up to Aberdeen Mall one cold Saturday morning, and the parking lot somehow is completely full. All right? Well, instead of driving around and looking, you decide to sit at a location where you have about 20 parking spots. And you just turn the car off. It's a little bit warm, so you're just going to sit there. You want to save the environment, so you're not driving around. Absolutely. So the question is, all right, as you're sort of sitting there formulating, of course, your brain thinks up questions. The question is, how long do you have to wait before a parking lot frees up? Okay, well, this is quite authentic problem. You need to know the answer. You know what the solution is. You need a parking spot. Right? So the question is, well, how long is that going to take? Well, let's say we made that into a question on our exam. So it would look something like this. It's a cold morning, 20 parking spots. How long would you have to wait? So again, known solution, but the process is unknown. And some things here that the students really have to do to answer this is they have to make some assumptions. What would be one of the assumptions they would have to make?
That you're the only one who's waiting for parking.
Sure, okay, so right, we might want to put in there that you are commanding these 20 parking spots. No one else can get at them. What else might they have to assume?
That everybody spends the same amount of time.
Yes, not only that they spend the same amount of time, but how much time? Well, I don't know. You have to think then. How long does you typically spend shopping? Me, I'm good for 5 minutes, really, and then I'm just in a daze. But let's say 2 hours. 2 minutes is too short. A day is too long. 2 hours seems reasonable. So you have to come up with that. The student would have to come up with that. Then you have to create a bit of a model. Well, there's another couple of layers of assumptions. And then, of course, you have to apply that model to come up with some number here, which is how long you have to wait. So this is a fairly authentic problem in the fact that, again, known solution, we know where we want to get. We don't quite know what the process is. And, of course, it covers all of these. Now, which of these do the students hate the most? Which of these three here? Creating the model is bad, but I would argue, as did Missouri, that assuming things is hard. The problem when you make an assumption is you no longer have you're not on solid ground. All right? Is that assumption right? And I always tell my students, it's not right or wrong, it's reasonable and unreasonable. If you try and convince me that someone's spending 2 days in the mall, and that's kind of an average value for all shoppers, that is unreasonable. 2 minutes is unreasonable. An hour is reasonable. 2 hours is reasonable. 3 hours is reasonable. 4, 5, 6 is maybe starting to, So at any rate, we can modify this problem a little bit. And if we just sort of take out that assumption part, we nibble a little bit at the top here. All right, I would argue. And we add that in. Okay, so now students have a time scale to work with, which is, kind of good, but now they don't have to make that particular assumption anyway. They're still left with creating the model, all right? So synthesis and applying that model, analysis, and of course, they know about parking and that sort of thing. Well, I would argue that, again, students would not be terribly happy with this, especially since I teach physics, and at no time do I cover parking. Okay, no time do I cover parking. So we should maybe nibble a little bit more off the top, and give them a little bit of the model. When we build this model, we make an assumption that the shoppers leave at regularly spaced intervals. Okay? And that is built into this model. So now, basically, I've sort of got rid of that, nibbled a little bit more off the top. Well, let's put this whole thing into form here. This is what the final question looks like. One Saturday morning, you pull into Aberdeen Mall, and all parking spots are full. It's a cold morning. You decide to wait where there are 20 parking spots. On average, shoppers spend 2 hours. Assume shoppers leave at regular spaced intervals. How long would you have to wait? This would be reasonable. However, this problem has been studied now. And someone in a textbook somewhere has put in this little formula, known as the parking lot formula. Now the process is known. Okay? They basically need to know about this formula, need to know that there's going to be some time scale of shopping and the number of spaces, and really now we've reduced that whole problem to one of recalling this equation. To add insult to injury, they would also require a calculator to do this, even though 120 divided by 20 is not really that difficult. Okay, so you can see the slippery slope that we can be on, going from authentic problems to inauthentic problems. And unfortunately, this is a lot of what happens in physics. So in his talk, he makes, Mazur makes this prediction about this type of problem solving, just in the same way as our factory line workers have been replaced by robotics. Anything to do with information retrieval or known processes are going to be replaced by computers. Right? They will be able to do it faster and more accurately for most known process type problems there. Okay, so of course this is why it's so important to give the students the higher learning skills. Well, let's look at real problem solving. Here's my problem here. Here's my solution, which is known. And one of the inherent things that we face is that, of course, it's not a straight line from here to here. You need to go and try many different things before perhaps finding the rather convoluted or sometimes very simple process to get to your solution. As I was once explained to me, that the difference between a good scientist and a really good scientist is not necessarily a knowledge base, which is really important, but it's the best scientists are the ones that can run up and down the most trees in the shortest amount of time, all right, before finding that right tree. I.e., they are able to move up a tree and realize, or go down that road and realize that that's now the wrong road, and they should be trying a new road. All right. Here's the problem with our education system. What happens if a student tries a road and gets it wrong? Tries a wrong road, tries a wrong road. Well, typically what will happen is they will get an X because they got it wrong. Okay. Well, what does that reinforce in students? That really reinforces them, all right, to be afraid of making mistakes. So instead of becoming risk takers, they become risk aversion. Or averse to risk, avoiders of risk. Thank you. Although we could use averse. I like that. Okay, so this is one of the problems that, of course, and I think we're all a little bit aware of that. So let's have a look at this picture. This is a typical final exam photograph. Resolution is not great, but of course you can see all the students in their rows there. And let's talk about what this sparks inside of you. What do you think about this particular image? What are some words that come to mind when you see this image? Isolation, stress, good.
Marathon, long haul.
Marathon, absolutely, especially their 3 hours exams, absolutely.
Artificial.
Yeah, artificial. All right. Punishing, grueling, uncomfortable. The key word was one of the first ones, and it's really evident in this one, isolated. Right? So this student is isolated. And this is a problem with high stakes exams, is that one of isolation. So we'll talk about that. Well, let me just say a few things about it. When in our professional lives are we isolated from any source of knowledge? True, sometimes we're removed from other people, but very few times are we completely cut off from any other source of information. If we're doing a grant proposal, you know, no one's standing over our shoulders saying, no, you can't look, you can't Google that. You have to know that paper by heart. You can't go look it up. Well, of course, that doesn't really ever happen. And of course, that rarely happens without other people. You're always interacting with other people, bouncing ideas off of people. So that's one of the main concerns in this type of exam is, of course, the students are isolated, completely cut off. Now, what can we do to remedy that? Well, in my courses, I often will provide them with a formula sheet. In physics, there's lots of formulas. Very often in my physics class, I'll give them this at the start of the year, a formula with like 60 formulas on it, and I'll ask, well, you know, how does it make you feel? And a lot of people are, wow, I'm completely overwhelmed. What are some other options that you guys have or that are available to us? Yeah.
I used to let students bring one 3x5 card. Written on if they wanted to the exam.
Absolutely. So sometimes in my upper level courses, I'll let them make their own formula sheet up. All right? Some of them have developed a real knack for writing super small. Anyone here do open book where they're allowed to bring a textbook in? Right? Or notes, course notes, yeah.
I give in most of my English classes. I have a big question, and there's choice in that, 5 or 6 questions. And I give the students that in the last week of class. They can't bring notes or text into the final exam. But it does lessen their exam stress, and if they take the time, they can prepare for it.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I've done that in my courses as well, where I say, well, you're going to have a topic. You'll have to write 2 or 3 from this here. You should go and prepare, or you can't bring it in, but at least you now have something to really focus on. Okay, so the other thing about these exams, they tend to be high stakes. High stakes meaning 40 or 50% of the marks, sometimes more. Sometimes if you have a final and 2 midterms, maybe with a lab, it could be up to 80% of the mark. So one of the things that this reinforces is that the students study for exams, and this is not unreasonable. We encourage students to study for exams. I'm going to come back to that exact wording in a second here. Well, if they study for exams, this high stakes issue and the fact it's sort of a one-time event tends to promote cramming. When do they do most of their studying? Leading up to that exam. And it's been fairly well documented that cramming results in no long-term retention, possibly no transfer of information or transfer of knowledge. And so Eric Mazur comes with this conclusion here that exams are the silent killer of education innovation. And if we look up here, how would we like this sentence to end? Students study for success or knowledge? Absolutely, right? I mean, really, we'd like to change this last word here. All right? When we go and we study, read new papers and this sort of thing, we're not studying, we're not reading those for exams. We're reading those for knowledge, and that may be trying to find a solution to a problem, maybe trying to better ourselves, that sort of thing. Okay? So there's a bit of an issue with high stakes exams. The other problem that we have that Professor Mazur points out is this inherent dichotomy of teaching. So take a moment and just describe, think about some words that would use to describe your role relative to students. Right? And you can just shout them out, that's absolutely fine.
Facilitator?
Facilitator, good.
Mentor.
Sorry?
Authority.
Authority, yeah.
Coordinator.
Coordinator, good.
Spark.
Spark, excellent, yeah. Is there another side to us? Examiner. So what we find is that in some sense we're coaches, right? I mean, for the most part, we are cheering for our students. We want them to do really well. Okay? Now, in the Olympics, if you are a figure skating coach of one of the competitors, are you allowed to be the judge? Well, no, you're not, okay? So this is one of the other things that we have. We are also judge, jury, and I'll let you finish that statement, okay? How do we deal with this dichotomy? Well, we like to believe that we are objective, right? That there's some objectivity built into what we do. Well, let's look at objectivity. Which of these layers here can we truly be objective for? Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Just the bottom ones. All right? Some people will see a painting and they will love it. Some people will hate it, and some people won't even know what to do with it. All right? So this part here tends to be a little less objective. Of course, with 200. Yep.
You decide what information you want them to know, and that's
Yes.
when you're going to test it. Maybe the arguments against whether they're being objective or not.
Yes. But if we're looking at just like a definition, we can be objective whether this definition is correct or not correct. All right, so of course we're down at the bottom there. So these are problems that he addresses, he looks at. We're looking at low level in terms of Bloom's taxonomy testing. We're looking at isolation, we're looking at high stakes, and we're looking at this dichotomy of our particular role and objectivity. So he presents some suggestions. I'm already a little slow. It was that video. So first thing is access to information. One of the things that we, of course, are constrained by is the sheer number of students. If you have a class of 200 students, all right, and you're only one person, or maybe with some TAs, it's very difficult to come up with some final exam that you can be objective on and you can actually mark in some reasonable amount of time. Right? So clearly there might be a trend to doing computer-based testing. Right? That would basically then end or solve some of the workload issues here. Already we're doing it with multiple choice. You can run it through the scanner. All right, save yourself many hours of that, although sometimes the scanner costs hours, but that's a technological issue. So of course the problem with working on a computer is you now have access to everything. You have access to Google. And how do you deal with that? Well, one argument is that if you have access to Google, you're taking away this part here. And really, on an exam, we want to be testing these parts here, at any rate. So allowing access to this is not necessarily a bad thing. And the argument is basically that, I've lost my train of thought, that allowing this will solve some of our numbers issues and also force us to make sure exams are written to test those parts. So, for example, if you write a test question that can be Googled and the answer can be immediately searched on the internet, it's not really an authentic problem, is it? So that's one argument there. Another suggestion is to end isolation. So some of you may have seen this type of test before. This is essentially a scratch-off pad here. This is called the immediate feedback assessment technique. Sue Purdy uses this in one of her biology courses. I use it as well. I use actually a computer-based version of this. But the idea is that the students will come in, do a test on their own, and then they will get into a group, and that group will repeat the same test using one of these forms here. Now, how do these forms work? Well, basically, you scratch off, and if there's a star where you've scratched off, you've got the answer correct. Limitation of this is, of course, multiple choice. But as a group, if you were to work on this together, you would sit down and probably you would start off as saying, here's question 1, what did you get, what did you get, what did you get? All right, if everyone got D, well, it's pretty clear, you scratch off D. Hooray, you got it right. Well, the next question, you maybe sit down and maybe 2 of you got A and 2 of you got B. Now you have to sit down and figure out which way the group is going to vote, because you only get one card for your group. So in this particular case, they choose A. It's the wrong answer. Well, that could be the end of it, but it isn't because you get another chance. All right? But every chance you take costs you a few marks. All right? So then they go with B. Hooray, we got it right. And so on. So this is a wonderful tool. Groups get very excited about it. You generate a lot of discussion of the topics. As the company that makes this will tell you, the students leave knowing the answer. Right? During the test is actually now a learning experience, not just a one-time shot. And so the students come back knowing the right answer. They've started discussing things as almost scientists or as academics. So this type of test promotes that type of learning, which is wonderful. If you have any interest in this, you can talk to me or Sue Purdy, and we'd be happy to show you. You absolutely can. The nice thing about this is it's really tactile. You have to scrap. You really have to commit. Whereas,
I used them and they had a lot of problems cheating in your class.
is that right? Yeah. It is a little more tactile than just pressing the button A or clicking on A on Moodle. It requires that extra little bit of effort. So, and the grading depends on how many times you've scratched. So, a quick assessment of what, basically an argument to focus the assessment on feedback and not ranking. This is an analysis that Eric Mazur did with his courses. I basically took some similar data that I have for my courses, applied the same analysis. And what we have here is this is a 29-point multiple choice test that students take on a very particular part of physics. And basically it allows us to assess whether they think as Newtonians, right? Newtonian physics, if you're up here above 21, you understand forces, you understand how forces cause motion. And if you don't understand that, you're sort of below 21 there. And the other thing that we plotted against is the course grade. So this is the course that covers forces, although I only cover it for about a week, and the course is, of course, 13 weeks. But if you look at two sections here, so these are people that we would say are Newtonian thinkers and understand situations, you see that there is a large variation in the scores and the courses that the students get. Right? Clearly this person here understands Newtonian mechanics, but did not do terribly well in the course. Over here I also have someone who does not understand Newtonian mechanics, but did well in the course. So the conclusion that one might draw from this is that objective ranking is a bit of a myth. Okay? This kind of goes back to those people that didn't do university, we would call them dropout, although often it's just a really informed decision. They wanted to go somewhere else. And they become superstars, all right? And I'm sure we all know people that did really well in courses, and then at the end, left school, did not, perform as we might expect. Although again, definition of success is a little bit tricky. We saw that. All right, so the other thing about what he suggests is that we should focus courses on skills and not content. And this was briefly mentioned about designing the course from the top down. So describe the course, what you want the students to get out, either of skills or other types of objectives. Figure out what those outcomes are, and then figure out a way to measure those outcomes. Are the students actually coming out of the course with that? Now the assessment is built in, then you can decide on instructional method, the particular content in that course, etc. People that are really good at that are people in OL. I worked with Michelle Harrison and learned so much about this method of designing a course. So lots of options there to get help with that. The other recommendation is to resolve this coach-judge conflict. One simple way is the way we do it. If we're applying for a grant, you go to external evaluators. I've started to do that with my upper level lab course. I will coach the students through their labs. Their reports will be marked by my colleagues in physics. We don't have an overwhelming number of students, so each of my colleagues will do one or two. But now I've got an external evaluator in there. Takes me out of that judge-coach kind of conflict. The other recommendation is that we should be looking at more peer and self-assessment. So students looking at other students' work and evaluating it critically. This, of course, develops metacognitive skills or executive functioning. Basically, they're looking at their peers' work. There's already a system in place called calibrated peer review. I think Moodle also allows you to do this type of thing with students. If they upload reports onto Moodle, Moodle will distribute those reports randomly to other students in the class for them to basically review. Calibrated peer review simply is a new extra step where the students look at 3 papers, they apply a rubric, they give those papers a mark, and of course those papers are poor, fair and good papers. And so now you can get a sense of how well a student can critically look at other work. And so any mark they give is calibrated by that initial procedure. All right, so thanks again, first of all, for Ginny for having me, and St. Andrews University, where I spent my sabbatical and attended a couple of conferences where assessment was a major topic, and I guess Thompson Rivers University for letting me go on sabbatical. And thank you guys for attending.
Thanks, Mark.
I wanted to make a quick link to this presentation and what we do in the Teaching Center. I'm Gary Hunt, for those of you who don't know me. Could you go back to your slide about outcomes? I hope you all are aware that we have a Learning Outcomes Initiative underway in which the goal is to have explicit learning outcomes written for all of our programs and all of our courses. But this alignment between designing the learning goals that you have for your students and then thinking about how you can assess them to determine whether or not the students have reached your stated outcomes is at the heart of the thinking about arriving at authentic and assessments that will really allow you to determine if your students have reached their outcomes. So people in the center, me included, are offering assistance to any faculty or individual to kind of go through this alignment process, write your outcomes, think about what assessments would work well, and link that to instructional activities.
A couple of things that I noticed at St. Andrews is that their courses, of course, all designed already, but one of the things that they do is they write their final exams like a month before term starts. So when I got there in August, they were busy writing their final exams, which would occur in December. Those final exams are then sent out to external, well, first they go to an internal round of evaluation, then they go to an external round of evaluation. After the exams are done, external evaluators come in and they sample the final exams and look at the marking, compare it to sort of the rubric of the master, making sure everything is self-consistent, which just blew me over with the amount of work and effort that required and collaboration. Yes?
So for Aboriginal education, it's really important if we have students that stop their classes because they haven't met the academic standards, that we spend time with the students, especially if they're, well, all the students, but the ones that come from places that have a strong experiential elders in their community. It doesn't matter what's said here. What matters is the net result of their experience here, and what have they learned about the university setting that they can think about. So it's really important for those students to know that maybe they didn't make this course, but think about all the other things that came good out of the university, and maybe those students will be back. And that's worked quite well with students that have stopped.
Yes, I often talk to my physics students and I say, hey, if you have trouble with physics, you're not a bad person. It just means you have trouble with physics. And I show them actually my first midterm that I took. And it's really the same course, and I got 50% on that midterm. I said, just don't get 50% because you'll probably become a physicist. And that usually scares them enough to do better than 50%.
Thanks again, Mark. I'm going to end it because I think...
Yeah, sorry, I went a little long.
No, it was great. It was really useful. And I'll remind you by email of the next presenters. But I believe they are February 3rd, Jim Hugh, and March 3rd, Chris Adams in this series. And if you didn't have time to finish this survey, please be the first to actually do this and send this to me in inter-office mail. please? Thanks, and if you do have the little survey finished, I'd love to have it.
Thank you.
Good to meet you, Craig.